Since 1934, Iowa's farmers have turned to the Iowa Farm Bureau Spokesman as their trusted news source. Now, the Spokesman speaks. Listen in and hear from leading experts on topics important to farmers and agriculture. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to our January 25th edition of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. I'm Andrew Wheeler, and today's episode features a conversation with Zach Johnson, the Minnesota farmer and YouTube sensation who's known to his 700,000 plus subscribers as the Millennial Farmer. We also have a discussion with Brian Waddingham of the Coalition to Support Iowa's Farmers about a new assistance program that's available to livestock farmers impacted by last summer's derecho. And Iowa Farm Bureau President Craig Hill joins us to talk about Iowa's influence on the American Farm Bureau's new national policy positions, which were adopted earlier this month. Let's start right there with President Hill. Spokesman editor Dirk Steimel caught up with Craig just last week on the heels of the American Farm Bureau's first ever virtual convention.
We're here with Craig Hill, president of the Iowa Farm Bureau, to recap the national policy discussion at the American Farm Bureau's annual convention and how the goals established during that discussion will affect farmers here in Iowa this year and beyond. Craig, the Iowa delegates who participated in the policy session focused a lot of their attention on improving livestock markets. What were those policy positions, and why will they be important for Iowa farmers moving forward?
We did place a lot of attention on livestock markets, Dirk, and the concerns that came from our members were justified. Over the past couple of years, several major market disruptions have occurred, and livestock producers have been at somewhat of a disadvantage. Additionally, when you consider that more than 80% of our packing industry is controlled by the Big Four, that's just too much market power. And farmers support a fair, healthy, competitive marketplace where bargaining power is on equal footing and where buyers and sellers can come together and agree on prices that are fair. Cattle producers in particular have lost trust in the system. To restore that trust, we are asking GIPSA, or the Grain Inspection and Packers and Stockyards Act, a division of USDA, and the Ag Marketing Service for stronger enforcement of the current laws and obligations, better reporting, better price reporting, and more robust price reporting. Let's make transactions more visible so everyone can see and everyone can feel some comfort that they're being treated fairly. In a nutshell, I think it's about transparency. It's about rebuilding trust and making certain that livestock producers are getting a fair deal.
With these livestock marketing policies in place, what are the next steps for American Farm Bureau?
Well, the new policies enacted at our convention will instruct our staff at the American Farm Bureau to engage with lawmakers, regulators, and other parties to see that the desires that our producers have are met. A higher standard of reporting, strict enforcement of fair practices. In addition, I think AFBF will be seeking a comprehensive study just to discover what percent of the cattle trade is needed on a negotiated basis for reliable market price information. Robust price discovery. I think that's important to everyone in the marketplace, and I think we'll be working diligently over the next year to make some reforms that will enable producers, like I say, to rebuild trust.
The Iowa delegation also supported policy to boost sales of higher blends of ethanol and biodiesel. What was changed or strengthened in the American Farm Bureau policy as a result of that, and why is that important for Iowa?
Well, the development of renewable energy from agricultural sources is an incredibly important thing to a state like Iowa. And the benefits to the consumer and the environment have just been, frankly, enormous. The beneficial legislation several decades ago that enabled this success was called the RFS, Renewable Fuel Standard. And it's up for reauthorization, or in other words, to be renewed again by this new Congress in 2022. Now, of course, we support its continuation, but we also support its expansion expansion into a larger percentage of liquid fuels that can be consumed by the consumer. So higher octane levels, improved air quality are all features of renewable fuels. And when we think about biofuels, I think we just have to acknowledge it's been a big win for everyone. When people come across state lines, I think it's more important also to have uniform labeling and identification at the pump so consumers know what to look for. Dirk, wouldn't it be nice to have a uniform national standard for pump handles, something easily recognized by color so folks know what they're getting? I think their choice will clearly be renewable as long as they understand the benefits and the pumps are correctly labeled.
Another Iowa policy adopted by American Farm Bureau called for the creation of a harvest price option on acres where farmers were forced to take the prevent plant option on the crop insurance. Why is the harvest price option important? And if it's created, how will it help farmers?
Well, the crop insurance policies Iowa farmers are buying are referred to as revenue policies. They cover both yield and price, yield times price actually, and establishing revenue guarantees. Farmers are responsible for their marketing of their crops, paying the crop insurance premiums and all other production expenses. But the problem is when you have forward priced your crops for delivery at harvest in a year in which you are prevented to plant, you must go to the market then to buy back those bushels you were unable to produce. So what if those bushels are at a higher price than what you had forward contracted for, and you have to go in the marketplace and buy those bushels back? Well, we're asking for an adjustment to crop insurance policies that protect those that are forward pricing their crops and won't be caught in this situation.
Over the years, Craig, Iowa Farm Bureau has been very successful at drafting policies that are in turn adopted by the national organization. Why do you think Iowa Farm Bureau has experienced so much success in the policy arena?
Well, I think you must begin with the foundation of respect and reputation that Iowa has as a state. We are number 2 in America in terms of agricultural receipts. But on a per capita basis or a geographic basis, no other state compares nationally to Iowa. We are number 1. And I would suggest that even globally, Iowa's reputation as a food and agricultural state is enormous. So farmers and ranchers across the country, I think, are interested in what Iowa thinks. Then it's about process, the process that we use here in Iowa. We involve everyone. We go to our members. We survey our members. We ask their opinions. We ask for them to identify issues and concerns, problems that may be on the horizon. Then we form a resolutions committee that researches and draws upon information to point directions that may be helpful. Our staff steps in support and helps gather information and assists, of course, both members and the resolutions committee. But then we have a farmer representing his or her county in every county of Iowa. It's called our voting delegate. They engage the county in discussions, engage the board of directors in discussions. They reflect their own opinions, but others as well. And they find consensus solutions in our delegate body when we convene in September. It's well researched. It's considered by a broad range of farmers. So when I take our goals to the American Farm Bureau Resolutions Committee, it's met with anticipation and some appreciation for what we go through to arrive at the right conclusions here in Iowa.
It's a true grassroots process. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. And I'm saying it's also comprehensive and extensive. We just don't gather the opinions of a few. We gather the opinions of many, and we find consensus, and we dig up the right information, the kind of information that leads us to those conclusions that will be helpful.
It's always good to have President Hill on the podcast, especially when it's to talk about the impact that Iowa is having on the national policy conversation and what those new American Farm Bureau policy priorities mean for farmers here in our state. Now we turn to Brian Waddingham, who's the executive director of the Coalition to Support Iowa's Farmers. The coalition recently announced a new program to assist livestock farmers who were impacted by last summer's derecho, and we wanted to have Brian on the podcast to talk about it. Spokesman reporter Corey Munson has the story.
Thank you so much for joining us, Brian. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for asking.
Now, we want to talk a little bit about the Derecho Windbreak grant program, but ahead of that, can you just remind us what the mission of the coalition is and kind of who you're serving with your efforts?
The Coalition to Support Iowa's Farmers is designed to help livestock farmers with questions they have pertaining to either starting a livestock farm or growing a livestock farm. So we can answer farmer questions over the phone, or we can go right out to the farm and visit with the family about what their questions are, whether it's pertaining to siting a new barn or feedlot, interpreting the more than 250 pages of rules and regulations that apply to their farm, or maybe ways to enhance neighbor relations, or even discuss best management practices such as planting trees and shrubs around livestock barns and feedlots.
I'm glad you mentioned the trees and shrubs because I know after the windstorm we experienced here in Iowa on August 10th, 2020, a lot of that cover that was around existing livestock facilities was destroyed. So you guys really stepped up to the plate and are trying to make a difference in replacing that and helping regrow some of that green protection. Can you tell us a little bit about the Derecho Windbreak grant program, kind of how exactly it came about, and tell us a little bit about the success you've seen so far?
The CSIF Derecho Windbreak Grant Program kind of came about from Tim Bardole, who used to serve on the Iowa Soybean Association board. He thought it would be a great opportunity to assist livestock farmers due to the fact that many windbreaks and trees and groves of trees cannot be insured. So they reached out to the coalition to see if this is a project that we wanted to take on. And after careful consideration, we decided that this would be something that would tie in perfectly with our Green Farmstead Partner Program, as you reference, where we assist livestock farmers in planting windbreaks around open feedlots and confinement barns. And once the coalition staff was able to get out and see some of that damage and the devastation that was caused by that derecho, it just really reinforced our commitment to wanting to do something to help livestock farmers. So about mid-December, we launched the program where we are seeking farmers that had established windbreaks damaged during that derecho on August 10th. And really the only other parameter is you have to have livestock in an open feedlot or in a confinement barn, and trees or windbreaks surrounding those structures that were damaged. So that's a little bit on the parameters of the program, and farmers can just apply by going to our website, supportfarmers.com.
And remind us, what is the value of these windbreaks, of these tree and shrubs around these buildings?
Well, windbreaks play such a large role. And if it's around, if you've got windbreaks planted around your open feedlot, it's a great way to protect against those harsh winter winds. It may provide some shading. It could also help with odor mitigation. If you have a building with pigs or cattle or poultry or dairy cows in it, those trees again can help reduce odor. They can improve neighbor relations by screening that building and improving aesthetics. Also, it can help reduce energy costs, so your fans don't have to work as hard, and you also don't have to spend near as much time moving snow from around driveways, pit fans, tunnel fans, that sort of thing. If those trees are in the right place, they can really save a lot of time. Not to mention if you don't have to get up on the roof of that building to remove snow. A properly designed windbreak has just a lot of tangible benefits that farmers find very useful and helpful.
It does sound like this requires some expertise to know where exactly to place the windbreak as opposed to just throwing trees any willy-nilly all over the property. So can you kind of describe to us a little bit about what sort of professional input goes into this process?
Once the farmer submits their grant application, there's a committee that will review it, and coalition staff will go out to the farm, assess the damage, just kind of make a few notes about how important that windbreak is to that farmer. And from there, we will refer that farmer to one of our 28 nursery professionals that's a member of the Green Farmstead Partner Program. And that nursery professional will then go out, work with that farmer, develop a plan, put together a full landscape plan, and taking into consideration what species of trees were there before, how many trees were there before, and then maybe even offer suggestions on a different species of tree that may provide more tangible benefits for that farmer than what was originally planted there. But it's a full team effort here. But we really put a lot of trust in our nursery professionals to make sure those trees are put in the right place as to not hamper the livestock operation.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that's one of the great values of it as well, is knowing that it's not just, you have expertise going into this process. So you've mentioned a few times about the Green Farmstead Partner Program, and that this kind of grew out of that. Can you describe that specific program? And I know it's been around since 2009, so this is not a new thing for you guys.
The Green Farmstead Partner Program, as you mentioned, was started in 2009, and it was done so because we thought there was a real need to put windbreaks around livestock farms. And it's for a lot of the reasons I previously mentioned, whether it's to improve aesthetics, enhance neighbor relations, reduce odor, save energy, save labor. But we also knew that it was critical to get those trees in the right place. So you controlled the snow deposition, you put it where you wanted it, and also you didn't interfere with tile lines running around confinement barns with manure pits. So it was just really a program that we thought was really needed. And in the last 11 years since the program has started, we've planted over 77,000 trees on livestock farms all across the state of Iowa.
So it sounds like this has had an amazing impact, not only visually, but environmentally on those operations. Can you share any stories or any memories that stick out to you of a particular success that you've seen from this program?
Well, I think one great example is we had worked with a livestock farmer who had hogs. He had several hog buildings on different sites and planted trees. Now, obviously, this is something many farmers choose not to do all at once, but you start with one site, put your trees on the north and the west side. But his savings in LP over one winter nearly paid for the entire 2 rows of trees on the north and the west sides that he put around the one barn versus the other barn that had no trees. So again, real tangible benefits. And these windbreaks do pay for themselves. Even like I mentioned earlier, if you or an employee doesn't have to get on the roof of a livestock building to move snow, that right there is worth a lot of money because we certainly don't want anybody slipping and falling off that roof and getting hurt. So again, that's just one example of a success story we've had. And there's, I know, a lot more like that out there.
If you raise livestock in Iowa, it's got to feel good knowing that you have a group like the Coalition that's always in your corner, even when something unthinkable happens, like last summer's Derecho. To learn more about the Coalition's Derecho Windbreak grants or any of the other services the Coalition offers livestock farmers, head on out to supportfarmers.com. Okay, I'm guessing that a number of you are already fans of our next guest. You might even be one of his 700,000 plus YouTube subscribers. Zach Johnson farms in west central Minnesota, and roughly 5 years ago he created a little YouTube channel called The Millennial Farmer. What happened next was pretty remarkable, and he's going to tell you all about it. But before we bring on Zach, I want to remind you that he's one of our keynote speakers for Iowa Farm Bureau's upcoming Young Farmer Conference, which is a virtual event taking place on January 29th and 30th. So if you'd like to hear more from the Millennial Farmer, after this podcast interview, be sure to head out to iowafarmbureau.com and get registered for that conference today. Now here's the Millennial Farmer, Zach Johnson, with Iowa Farm Bureau's Caitlin Lamb.
So we are here with Zach Johnson, also known as the Millennial Farmer by his more than 700,000 YouTube followers. Zach, we're so excited to have you join us for this episode of the Spokesman Speaks podcast, as well as a keynote speaker for our virtual Iowa Farm Bureau Young Farmer Conference at the end of this month. Now, before we get started on talking about your YouTube stardom, can you tell us about your family and farm in Minnesota?
Yeah, first off, it's good to be here. So thank you for doing this with me, Caitlin. But I am a sixth generation farmer in West Central Minnesota, full time on the farm right now. It's just Dad and myself. We have guys that work with us seasonally, and if anybody watches my videos, you certainly know Jim. So he's around quite a bit. We actually just replaced a bearing in the end of an auger an hour ago. So Jim works with us, but Dad and I are the only two full time. My wife and I live right here on the farm. We bought the house for my parents about 2.5 years ago now, and we are raising our 3.5 kids here, meaning we foster our niece. So we've got 3 of our own, and our niece lives with us as well, and doing the whole family farm thing. And by definition, that is what we are out here.
I'm sure this is the question that everyone asks, but what began the Millennial Farmer YouTube channel? What inspired you to wake up one day and make videos showcasing everyday farm life?
About 5 years ago, spring of 2016, I started that channel because I was seeing things mostly posted online from people I knew and acquaintances I had, and even a couple of relatives I have that know me and know the rural areas. Some of them come from rural areas. And, I always assumed they had some understanding of what goes on the farm. But some of the stuff I was seeing online told me otherwise, that they had just enough understanding to get kind of a twisted idea about what it is that we do. And, I was seeing things posted about stuff like GMOs and pesticides and drain tile and the way that we raise livestock. And I knew, or I could see that, yeah, there was some truth to what they were saying, but they didn't have the whole idea, and they didn't understand why we actually use those things as management tools on our farm. And the big piece they seem to be missing is the fact that, agriculture, like any industry, has evolved forward, and we now use the latest and greatest technology to do the best that we can with what we have. And that means, in a lot of cases, using things like GMOs and using pesticide correctly. And farmers have reasons for using these management tools, and it isn't because we're just, bound and determined to make big profits. It's because we understand the science and the technology behind it, and we understand how it makes it more efficient. And a lot of times, in a lot of situations, we understand how it's better for the consumer, better for the environment, and better for the farmer. And so I really wanted to just put the story out there and document myself on my farm and say, hey, this is me, this is my family, this is my dad, this is our family farm, and this is who we are. And instead of forcing it down people's throats about GMOs are fine and drain tile is good and we're not bad for livestock. What I wanted to do was to gain their trust and just, take them with me every day and let them get to know me and figure out who I am. And then hopefully they'd have a farmer that they could trust, so that when we are planting genetically modified corn and we are installing drain tile, and I do visit livestock farms, that they can see somebody that they feel like they know and trust talking about those things, and help them to understand a little bit more about why we use those tools on the farms. And that was and still is the main reason why I started this online platform that has just snowballed on me into something that I never could have imagined.
And I want to talk to you a little bit about that snowball that you're talking about, because you have 700,000 YouTube subscribers, including our family. You have a huge fan in our 2.5-year-old Ryan. His favorite video of yours is the one where Jim gets a tractor and cultivator stuck in the field. And
yes, that's a lot of people's favorite.
Yeah, I think it might be your most viewed video, actually, isn't it?
It is right now. Yes. Yep.
Yeah. And so what Ryan has started to do is he'll throw all of our blankets off of the couch and use them as mud. And he has a bungee rope that he hooks up to his play tractors, and kid you not, he recreates that video. It's the most hilarious thing.
That's pretty funny. I knew when we did that video that it was probably going to be pretty good. And the funny part is Jim the whole time was just disgusted with me that I had that camera with. And yet he secretly kind of loves the camera. He doesn't admit that. He pretends to hate it, but he doesn't mind it. And I was giving him a hard time when it was off, like, oh, don't worry, I won't put it on the internet. And lucky for him, only about 3 million people have seen it.
Yeah, only 3 million. No big deal.
Yeah, no big deal.
Yeah, Ryan's always telling my husband about your videos, but the funny part is, so we actually farm corn and soybeans in central Iowa. So my husband will be like, buddy, me and Papa do that too. But since my husband doesn't film it, I always tell him it doesn't count.
It's like fake farming unless you have a camera.
Yeah, exactly. It's got to be documented. So, obviously you have fans of all ages, but you also have fans who are fellow farmers. And from the comments I've seen on your videos, fans who have nothing to do with agriculture, but they say they find your videos fascinating. And some of them are technical, some of them not so much. So do you have an idea of who you see as your primary audience? And, has it just kind of evolved as your followers grew?
One of the lucky strengths that our channel has, and it was not something that we intended, and it wasn't something we ever thought about when we started it, but we've come to realize that it seems like, every age range can enjoy our videos. I think we've got roughly about half and half people that come from the farms and people that don't. So 50% of my audience, I think, is disconnected or at least removed from the farm in some capacity. It's cool. I never actually set out with the intention of talking to farmers, but half my audience does seem to be farmers. And I guess when you think about it, when we're passionate about what we do, that's obviously going to draw other farmers to this. So as farmers, we like that sort of thing. It's what we're passionate about. And so I think that's one of the strengths where, I've got everybody from the age of 2 to 100 years old. And I hear all the time from guys that will tell me, they sit down and love watching my videos with their son or with their daughter or whatever it might be. And they can enjoy it together. And I think that's one of the really big strengths that we have, that we never, like I say, we never put any thought into it. It's just, it kind of works out that way. I think our audience is really broad.
Yeah, that's really cool to see that different type of reach and how you're able to connect with your audience, no matter what their background is. And obviously, with the number of followers you have, you're capturing content that is interesting and engaging. But it's funny because, if you're in agriculture, we look at some of the things like calibrating or fixing up machinery or using a grain vac or even plowing snow. And unfortunately, sometimes pulling equipment out of the mud as these everyday things. But these are the things that you film that will sometimes get 1 million views. So what is it about these everyday and the life of videos that you think appeals to so many?
One of the things that I talk about in my speech is just that. And I think it's the fact that what we do is unique. And as farmers, we take that for granted. We're around it every day, and to us, it's just more work. But to the rest of the world, or at least to the rest of North America, where 1.5% of us are providing the food, fiber, and fuel for everybody, it's unique. Most people don't wake up every day and have to think about, how to be more efficient on a farm, or how are they going to go about caring for the animals that might be sick today, or how are they going to feed them, or what are they going to do for a tractor purchase, or how do we grow better food for the world? That's not something they wake up and think about. The same way as I don't wake up and think about how to be, a better lawyer or a doctor or an accountant. Most people don't have the opportunity to drive big tractors and work in the big fields and work with livestock and really get to see, for lack of a better term, the fruits of their labor come to fruition every year. And when I plant those seeds in the spring and I nurture them all summer long and I watch the plants grow and then I watch them ripen and I get to go harvest them and we store the seeds and then eventually we market them, from beginning to end, it's a very rewarding job. And I think that's a big piece of what is missing in a lot of people's lives. And I think even though we know as farmers, it's not necessarily a simple occupation, a lot of people view it as a simpler career or a simpler life, right? And we know that it's very difficult and it certainly has its own struggles, but But it's just, I think the uniqueness is the big thing that jumps out to a lot of people and draws a lot of people in, because now all of a sudden they have access to a farm from the inside out, and what really goes on the family farms in America.
And that makes sense to me, especially when you talk about it being unique on the outside, but something that maybe we as farmers take for granted. It reminds me that one time I went with my husband and a group of his friends to California for a wedding. And a lot of people were so amazed that he and his friend were farmers. They were asking questions like, "Oh, so you actually get to, drive tractors and stuff," which they thought, when you're going long rows and everything all day for weeks on end, that it's probably not very exciting. But to them, they were very fascinated and had really interesting questions about what happened on the farm. So I totally get that.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's a thing. People are fascinated by it.
And I love the way that you're able to bring that to people in a really authentic and laid back way, because when we watch your videos, we feel like we know who you are. So did it take a while to become comfortable behind the camera?
Not too long. I was not necessarily uncomfortable behind the camera when I started, but I was uncomfortable putting myself online. I'm not necessarily a super outgoing person until I really get to know you, which surprises a lot of people. I've gotten a lot better at it because, I've grown a lot since this all started, and it's something that I've been working on. But I was never necessarily uncomfortable in front of my own camera. I'm a little more uncomfortable in front of other people's cameras. And where I really struggle is I'm still uncomfortable when I'm around other people with my own camera. That's one thing that, again, I've gotten better at, but that's when I get the most uncomfortable. But, from the beginning, I really didn't feel like I struggled in front of my own camera. It was more so the idea of putting it online was really the idea that sort of freaked me out in the beginning. But from the beginning, I got so much positive feedback from it that I was really hearing from a lot of friends and people in the area that, personally enjoyed it and thought it was so cool that, they knew I farmed and they knew me, but now all of a sudden they were getting to hear from their friend that they were always afraid to ask stupid questions. They could actually watch me doing the job that I do. And it was kind of that same reaction like you mentioned. They just thought it was so fascinating to see, what does the inside of a tractor look like, and why do you till at this direction, or why do you skip passes, or why does the combine do this, and all these odd little questions that we don't even think about as farmers. And so it was motivating that way. It's never really been too uncomfortable for me.
I get what you mean it's sometimes easy to make the content, but then once it's out there for people to view, you're being very vulnerable and that can be very difficult. But obviously you had really great positive feedback that opened conversations to help keep that going. And I find it interesting that you mentioned struggling, asking other people to be on camera with you. And I was interested in that. How did people feel about being filmed? I think of my father-in-law and other farmers around us, or our sales people. I might be banned from the farm if I put a camera in their face. And I'm sure everyone's used to it now. You talk about Jim, secretly loving it. But what was that like, trying to get other people on board? Do you ask people's permission? How does that work?
It's difficult. And from the beginning, it was very difficult. If you watch probably my first 100 videos, there's literally nobody else on camera unless it's maybe my kids or maybe my wife. But I was getting asked a lot if I just handled the whole farm myself, because they had never met Dad or Jim or anybody else that works with us. And that's a big part of the reason why, is because I didn't know how they would feel on camera. They all knew that I did it, but we didn't talk about it too much. Eventually it kind of got to a point where I had to say, okay, guys, the elephant in the room here, I've got to address it. Are you okay with the camera? And everybody is. And, now it's kind of, at least around the farm with our guys, it's known that every once in a while there's going to be a camera in their face, and I'm not going to give them any warning, because if I give them a warning, they don't act like themselves. It changes things. So all of a sudden, boom, you're going to turn around, there's going to be a camera in your face, and they know that we edit it. And if they say something that's stupid, or they look like a fool, that would never be my intention to put anything across like that, unless Jim gets stuck, of course. But It's something that we've gotten used to on the farm. When I go to other people's farms and I talk with other people, I do always make sure ahead of time, like, hey, okay, you're okay with the camera. Everybody here is cool. They know that I've got a camera. They know I'm going to use it. Everybody's good. And everybody says yes. And then you kind of just have to get comfortable with taking it out and hitting record. And, sometimes it's difficult to get over the awkwardness of it. And sometimes it's not. It's kind of surprising. Some people just roll with it like it's not even there and they do great. And other people you wouldn't expect it from, they sort of clam up and are uncomfortable with it. But it's always a balance. It's just one of those things that I've got to always try and figure out how I'm going to work with it.
And I have seen a couple of your videos where you have gone to other people's farms. You just recently posted a video from a bison ranch, and that was so cool. That's like one of my bucket list things. I would love to go see that. It kind of like freaks you out watching basically like a stampede of these humongous animals following the feed truck that you guys are in. But that looked like a really cool experience.
Honestly, it was awesome. And that Scott that we spent the day with out there, we actually spent 2 days with him, and it was so cool to see that and, get to hear and see some of the uniqueness of America's history there with the bison. And I had nonstop questions about how they manage this and how this works. And, what do you do with the meat and when do you buy them and how do you, it was so awesome to be able to be a part of and get to see up close. And then to be able to bring that to people like you and your family too is really the key to what I want to do, is to tell the story of all farms. And unfortunately, since I am a farmer, it's always easiest to tell the story of what's happening on my farm, but I try as much as I have time for with my platform to get out and share the story of other farms as well, because farming is so diverse. It's more than just what goes on a corn and soybean farm in west central Minnesota. It's, bison farms and orchard farms, and the Central Valley of California is more diverse than anything I've ever seen, and livestock. And I just, before I was talking with a shrimp farmer, and there's so much to it. And, that bucket would never run dry if you were pulling from it to try to come up with content about what goes on the farms here in North America.
Absolutely. And so getting those other perspectives out there is really awesome too. And doing all this and being able to interview other farmers, but primarily taking content from your own farm and putting it out there for the world to see. What's been like the biggest reward? Not that you do it for a reward. I'm not sure that's exactly the right word I'm looking for, but you know what I mean? You continue to do this for a reason, and I'm sure it's brought about things perhaps you did not expect.
Oh yeah, definitely. Probably the most rewarding thing is getting the comments from parents who tell me that it's suddenly like I've made farming cool again, and that their junior high kid sees what their dad does as something that is cool. And it's not that they didn't like farming before, but now all of a sudden, hey, dad does what the guy on YouTube does. And it's funny, I never imagined how big YouTube would get with the younger generation and what it's become. It's really become like they can tune in and find their own personalized TV shows. And that's what they're doing. And getting the comments from parents that talk about how much they approve of their son or daughter looking up to YouTube farmers in general, not just me, because there's so many of us that do it now. And that's probably the most rewarding thing. There's other rewards that have come with it. I've had cool experiences and met cool people like that bison farmer in South Dakota who I consider a buddy of mine now, and we talk all the time. And I've got to experience the farms in southern Florida down near the Everglades around Lake Okeechobee, and the day we spent out there was so fascinating to me. It was a whole different experience. Recently, we were able to use our platform to help raise over $60,000 for local volunteer fire departments, and we gave back, and they're going to use that money to buy grain bin rescue equipment and training. It's never ending, and of course, there's a financial aspect to it. It's been good for us that way as far as finances go. Yeah, we make money at it, and the amount of time we put into it now, I mean, we have to, but the more money we make at it, the more we can justify our time, and the bigger things we can do, like highlighting these other farms and helping to raise money for the volunteer fire departments and farm rescue and FFA and all the other organizations that we've been able to give back to.
And that's awesome. I saw that you were able to raise those funds for, grain to rescue equipment. That is just by far one of my worst fears, being married to a farmer, is because you see it on the local news sometimes that these deaths are happening, these accidents are happening. And so I'm always harping on him if he has to get in the bin, tell someone that you're going to be in there. Do you have a rope with you? I'm going to stand outside, just holler. So I think that's amazing.
Yeah, it was something that we saw a need for, and unfortunately, Minnesota leads the nation in grain bin deaths. The North and South Dakota are not much better. That upper Midwest, this whole upper Midwest area is bad as far as that's concerned. And we got to talking with some of our friends that are on the volunteer fire departments and figured out how some of it works. And it's just, I think it's so important for these volunteer crews, the departments and the first responders out in these rural areas to have the proper training and the proper equipment to help any farmers that might find themselves in that situation.
Absolutely. So that's awesome that you're able to use your platform to engage, inform, but then also give back to local communities. And as I mentioned earlier, you will also be joining us for our virtual Young Farmer Conference at the end of this month. Of course, we all wish we could be meeting in person. Such a bummer that we're still kind of in this rut. But your talk is titled, Farmers Are Just Like Real People. And I don't want to spoil your speech. If you want all the goods, you got to tune in. But as you speak to these young farmers, what do you hope is the major takeaway?
I guess the major takeaway by the end of the speech really is that, there's a way for all of us to be a positive voice for the industry. And when we're talking about agriculture and connecting with people, that is what we need right now, is these positive voices. And that doesn't mean everybody should go out and start a YouTube channel or any kind of, social media stuff. It means whatever might fit you, be that positive voice. Farm Bureau does some great stuff with ag in the classroom and getting kids involved. Maybe it's just correcting somebody at the coffee shop when you hear something that's not correct about agriculture. Just be the positive voice. If you think there's something that you could be good at to get the word out there in a positive way, consider doing that. And it doesn't mean that we're all going to be great advocates for agriculture, but if you think you could be in any way, it's what we need right now, because people are willing to listen, because what we do is unique. And if we can put that positive vibe out there now, that will last for a long, long time. And that is what we need in this industry.
That's awesome and great advice, because I'm sure a lot of people look at what you do and think, well, I could never do that. So maybe I should just stay where I'm at, keep my head down and keep working. But there are just so many different ways now to be out there and talking about the things that we're doing on the farm. And it doesn't have to have a social media aspect when you talk about ag in the classroom. Just being an educator with young children and their teachers and getting those positive, just good feels out there about agriculture can be something that everyone can definitely do. And of course, we appreciate you being a positive voice in the industry. And we thank you so much for being here today on the Spokesman Speaks podcast. And we look forward to hearing from you at the Young Farmer Conference and also tuning into future Millennial Farmer videos.
Hey, thank you for having me, Caitlin. I appreciate it.
It's not hard to see why Zach's attracting such a large following online. Just a down-to-earth guy who's super talented and passionate about sharing the story of agriculture. If you'd like to hear or see more of Zach, we've linked his Millennial Farmer YouTube channel to the notes for this episode. And remember to register today for the Young Farmer Conference to see him live this weekend. As I mentioned, you can register for the Young Farmer Conference at iowafarmbureau.com. And while you're out there, remember to sign up for our 6-part Economic Summit webinar series as well. With that, I'll wrap up this episode of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's interviews and that you'll join us for our next regularly scheduled episode on February 8th. Thank you for doing the work that inspires everything we do here at the Iowa Farm Bureau, and thanks for listening to The Spokesman Speaks.
Thank you for listening to The Spokesman Speaks, a podcast by Iowa Farm Bureau. Check out more podcast episodes at iowafarmbureau.com/podcast. You can also find and subscribe to the Spokesman Speaks podcast in the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and other popular podcast apps. We appreciate your ratings and reviews, and we welcome you to email us your feedback at podcast@ifbf.org.